Leadership is a dynamic practice. It requires a nuanced understanding of how to manage and inspire teams effectively. Recently, the Harvard Business Review identified 6 common leadership styles. Each of these styles offers some distinct advantages, and each is suited to different contexts and challenges. By understanding more about these styles, you can gain some valuable insights into effective leadership practices. Now, of course, adapting these styles to fit your team's needs and the demands of various situations is up to you. But learning how to do this will enhance your leadership effectiveness and will help drive success in your organization. I'm Bob Bordone. I'm a senior fellow at Harvard Law School. I'm the founder and former director of Harvard Law School's Negotiation and Mediation Clinical Program, and I'm the founder and principal of the Cambridge Negotiation Institute. Let's go. Okay, so let's review the 6 key leadership styles. The first of these is called Autocratic leadership. So this is not a very nice word to use, but it does describe some of the behaviors that we typically think of when we think autocrats. So what are they? Centralized decision-making, where the leader retains the final authority to make decisions independently and without the vote or even the input from team members.
I make the decisions here, Charlotte.
So Elon Musk of X, formerly known as Twitter, or Tesla or SpaceX, is largely known as somebody who follows this autocratic approach to decision-making. And I want to be clear, there are some considerable advantages to this approach. I think that's kind of obvious given how successful Elon Musk has been. But what are those advantages? Well, first of all, you just get a lot of stuff done. Secondly, there's accountability, right? Everybody knows where the buck stops. And honestly, in so many organizations where leadership and decision-making is diffuse, there's something nice about knowing, oh, right, Musk is the decision maker. The other thing, right, is it allows for efficiency in decision making. Now, of course, there are disadvantages to an autocratic approach to leadership. First of all, just it can be hard to work for someone like that. If they are a benevolent dictator, it's great, but if they're anything less than benevolent, it can be quite trying. Secondly, if an autocratic leadership approach isn't surrounded by people who have a lot of self-confidence, who are quite strong, then the leader doesn't get the information that they need to make good decisions. And this can be extremely problematic because you may be thinking things are going very well, but in fact you're not getting the information on the ground because the folks who would deliver to you are afraid of you. The other problem with autocratic leadership styles is that it can easily lead to brown-nosing or to groupthink. And I have done some work with CEOs who, knowingly or not knowingly, have this approach, and they think they're doing a fabulous job, and the work that I'm dealing with is that everybody else is afraid of them. Things are going off the rails. The organization is kind of headed for disaster, and they just don't know it. So the second leadership style is democratic leadership. This is an approach that involves engaging team members in the decision-making process.
We're all in this together.
Leaders who adopt this style seek input from their team, they encourage collaboration, and they value diverse perspectives.
What I need here is kind of your input.
There are considerable advantages to adopting a democratic approach. First, and perhaps obviously, it is consistent with cultural and political U.S. values. Second, by adopting a democratic approach, you often can end up with much more sustainable outcomes, meaning that if people feel heard, if people feel included, they are much more likely to actually make sure the thing that you've agreed to gets done. So there's a very rich research on what is called procedural justice. This is work done by Tom Tyler at NYU and Alan Lind at Duke. The procedural justice literature suggests that when people feel like they have a say in how things are decided, they report happier satisfaction with the outcomes, even when the outcomes are less good than if they had a more autocratic decision imposed on them. So that is to say, the democratic approach, when it is seen as transparent and fair, actually makes people feel heard and drives people to actually make sure they follow through on their commitments. Now, the democratic approach, for all its advantages, has considerable disadvantages, and anybody who's been living in the United States for the past 20 years can probably see what some of them are. First of all, it just takes a lot more time to get an outcome. When you're listening to everybody, when you're dealing with diverse opinions, it is less efficient than an autocratic decision maker. Here's the other thing. It requires a lot more interpersonal skill. If you have a huge amount of power and you just tell people what to do, that doesn't actually require so much skill. Working in a collaborative way with others, identifying what their stakeholders are, is messy. And a downside, sometimes it results in a compromise that doesn't fully meet anyone's interests. It's simply the thing that people could live with. So democracy, democratic leadership, all sorts of upsides, some less so good aspects. The third leadership style is called transformational leadership. So transformational leadership is focused actually on inspiring and motivating a team. This is done by creating a very compelling and inspiring vision.
I believe in you.
It's done by fostering great enthusiasm for achieving goals, by really building community. Leaders who use this style try to really elevate their team's performance because they encourage not just professional growth, but also personal growth. So a leader who might be thought of as a transformational leader would be Oprah Winfrey. Arguably, somebody who would be thought of that way might be Pete Buttigieg. These are people who have inspiring stories. They really try to include not just around the work, but also around the sense of belonging, the sense of inclusion. And there are lots of advantages to transformational leadership. I think, first of all, people feel personally fulfilled. They can really get behind their leader and the integrity of their leader. It goes beyond the workplace to feel like a calling or vocational. There can also be disadvantages. Sometimes transformational leadership overpromises on what it can deliver. If the person who is the transformational leader doesn't have a sense of integrity or ethics, what can happen is that folks end up almost in a cult-like situation that they can't get out of. Particularly when combined with an autocratic approach, transformational and autocratic can actually be dangerous to institutions because it could put personalities ahead of institutions. The fourth leadership style is called transactional leadership. This is characterized by a system of rewards and punishments that manage team performance.
You deserve to be punished.
So leaders who use this style will set clear goals and expectations, and then team members are motivated by the prospect of receiving rewards for meeting those targets or facing penalties for failing to do so. There are times when there are advantages to this approach. In a very big organization where there is little time to build consensus or brainstorm, transactional leadership can be really effective. If you're also in an organization where team members are not inclined to think creatively, perhaps have relatively low-level goals or tasks, transactional leadership to motivate them can be very successful. It also works when the leader has really thought through the incentives and rewards in a way that is well aligned to both the short and the long-term interests of the organization. Lastly, transactional leadership works when you need objective measurements to weigh success and you don't want to risk political considerations. Jeff Bezos of Amazon has often been thought of as being a more transactional style of leadership. The fifth approach to leadership is described as the laissez-faire approach. So laissez-faire might sound negative, but actually I think the way it's defined is quite positive, because it involves granting team members a very high degree of autonomy and freedom to make decisions.
I love the freedom.
It's a style that's suited for teams with skilled and self-motivated individuals who thrive with minimal supervision. There are considerable advantages to this approach. It encourages creativity. It can lead to very high worker satisfaction, particularly when workers are independently motivated. So it's an approach that works in organizations that attract creative or artistic types, and for organizations that really want their people to think out of the box. On the other hand, it's less effective if you're trying to build a very clear organizational identity. It's also an approach that works less well with staff or workers who need clear direction.
Tell me what to do.
Another risk is a laissez-faire approach can often feel unmotivating, particularly in a large organization. Some years ago, I was working in the context of a graduate school that had a dean that took on this laissez-faire approach. And the complaint was that it felt like folks at this school were on a big aircraft carrier in the middle of the Pacific, and it was doing fine, but if you asked where you headed, people would be just like, I don't know, we're just kind of floating around, right? So there was no mission, no driving goal. The last leadership style discussed in this HBS piece is called servant leadership. So servant leadership focuses on prioritizing the needs and the development of team members as individuals, with the leader serving as a supportive, empowering, and motivating figure. This is a style that emphasizes empathy. It emphasizes listening and focuses primarily on the growth of the individuals within the teams. So there are many advantages to this approach. It gets a very large buy-in from those within the organization. It also honors deep human and humanistic values. It sees people as full people and not just as a human resource to get something done. The approach tends to foster great organizational loyalty. So Fred Rogers, that is Mr. Rogers, was known to take this approach to leading his organization. Of course, there are downsides. First, it is less goal-focused from an organizational perspective. Second, it can be time-consuming, and it's hard to meet the needs and interests of individuals, especially when it's in a very big organization. Finally, when the individuals within the organization have conflicting values and needs and priorities, it can be very hard to do that servant leadership work and keep the organization moving forward. In truth, most of us work with, and we work for, people who are combinations of all of these styles. Having said that, it can be helpful for you to have your own sense of the style that works for you and the leadership style with whom you work best. So with that, I have 2 requests before you leave. First, I'd love to hear what you think your own leadership style is. Please put that into the comments below. And secondly, to grow your own leadership skills, please be sure to subscribe to this channel, like the video, and ring the bell so you never miss leadership and negotiation lessons here. Also, watch this next video, How to Mediate a Conflict Between 2 Employees. Thanks for watching and see you soon. Okay, it's not difficult to keep watching. Click, click.